Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Thank you once again for tuning in. This video is going to be special. It's going to be about Orion and how important Orion is and how amazing the web of connections is to Orion, to the lore of Orion, and to what it means. And I hope to really renovate our understanding of the constellation of Orion, the sign of Gemini, what it means to be born under that constellation, some of the ways in which history has treated this, and the sacred knowledge that we've sort of lost. But anyway, I have so much to get to, so let me start. I'm going to smoke a cigarette just so I can relax through this because there's a lot to say. So, I started studying Orion a while ago, and for a long time it was kind of frustrating because there's so many pieces and so many disparate parts to this puzzle. I had to put everything together like a puzzle. But my interest started with Genesis 6, 1 through 4, that verse describing the Nephilim, the men of old, the people of great renown, who inhabited the earth before the flood. And from the start, I kind of realized that these people were given a bad reputation because immediately after that line where it speaks about the great men who lived before the flood, it talks about the flood purging all the evil on this earth. And so with this video, I hope to kind of show you how that works and show you why that happened. That not necessarily these Nephilim were evil, but that even in ancient texts, in classical texts, it describes the nature of having power and the nature of being somewhat divine, semi-divine, or demigod, and what that means and how it can lead to both good and evil. But let me get started by talking about Orion in Egypt. Orion, whether or not you believe in theory that the pyramids of Giza match up with Orion's belt, Orion is nevertheless really important to ancient Egyptians. In the pyramid text, Orion is mentioned as the father of all the gods. And the constellation Orion had a name, Sah. And this was the ancient Egyptian name for Orion. And in modern Arabic, this word exists as well. And it's the word for righteousness, the word for to hold to one's promise, and it's the word for truth. So let's see. So the Nephilim are called that because they are the sons of Orion. Because the word for Orion in ancient Aramaic, which, you know, the Bible was not written all in Hebrew. It was written largely in Aramaic as well. And so that word, Nephila, is Aramaic for Orion. And so the more I looked into it, the more the Neph particle in different words was really interesting and intriguing for me. And it led me to explore lots of different myths. So in ancient Greece, the myth of Nephila and Ixion is an interesting one, where Nephila was created as a carbon copy of Hera, the queen goddess. And according to the myth, this carbon copy, Nephila, who became a sentient being, she was created in order to lure Ixion. He was a great king who had some moral hang-ups, who was kind of evil. So this king Ixion was lusting after Hera so bad that Zeus created Nephila in order to trick Ixion, in order to test him to see if he would succumb to his desires. So Nephila in ancient Greek means cloud or mist. And what's interesting is that so Ixion fell into lust, of course, and copulated with Nephili, and what resulted of this union was the race of the centaurs. And if you know anything about Greek myth, you'll know that the centaurs are kind of this, ragtag gang of rambunctious people, but then there are also good centaurs like Pholus or Chiron who had virtue and who were very wise and very gifted. So also, the word Nephili is connected to Zeus himself, because Zeus is called in many occasions Nephile Gerante, which means the Lord of the clouds, the leader of the clouds, he who directs the clouds. But it also could mean, he who directs the Nephilim, right? And this would reinforce Zeus's position as the king of all the gods, the head honcho of all the gods. And what's interesting about the myth of Nephili and Ixion is that it has almost a direct parallel in Egyptian myth, which is the story of Nephthys and Osiris. So Nephthys and Nephili, you can see how their names they both contain this Neph particle, and in my mind that cannot be a coincidence. And the fact that the myths are so similar is also not purely coincidental. I don't believe that. So the myth of Nephthys and Osiris is that because Nephthys, who was the sister to Isis, Isis is like Hera, she's the queen goddess, she's the mistress of everything feminine, and the supreme feminine goddess. So Nephthys was a carbon copy of Hera, of Isis, just like Nephili was a carbon copy of Hera. And even in depictions of Isis and Nephthys, they're indistinguishable from each other. They look exactly the same, except for their headdresses, which is what tells you which one is which. So in this myth, Osiris even fell for it. He thought that Nephthys was Isis, and so he copulated with Nephthys, and from that union was produced Anubis. Now, what happened was Set, who was the consort of Nephthys by, original designation, he found out that Nephthys was pregnant, and so he tried to kill the baby. But what happened was Isis saved that baby. She saved the baby inside of Nephthys' womb, and she took care of him. And this baby was Anubis, the jackal god, the special lord of the dead, that mystical god of funeral rites and the dead and judgment of the dead, and leading souls through the realm of the dead and leading them to their judgment in the afterlife. So even within the name Anubis, you have that Neph particle, but you have to understand that it's related to the Latin nubes, which means cloud and mist. It's the same meaning as Neph. So nubes and Neph mean the same thing, and also in the original Egyptian, his name is Anup. So the Nup could be Nub or Neph. It's Egyptian pronunciation is not exactly well known. We don't exactly know how it was pronounced. We can only guess. So this nubes particle and the Neph particle also draw us into another god who was the god of scribes in Mesopotamia and was a really prominent god. His name was Nebo. So Nebo or Nebo was also a word that meant blue, this lovely sapphire blue. And this blue, this color of majestic blue and deep, lovely blue was what they painted all of their temples with. The most prominent temples, like the Ishtar Gate, was painted in this celestial cerulean blue. And then if you have the kind of mental capacity or the capacity to believe that etymology can extend throughout cultures, you'll see that this word Nebo In Russian, niebo means, it is a type of blue, I believe, and it also means heaven. So here you go. Here's the relation between God, heaven, what's above, the sky being blue, and the god of scribes, Nebo, and this particle. We can see how this particle, just in itself, if a sound contained a spirit, an essence, the Neb, Noob, Neph would contain the essence of Orion, and I'm trying to use this video to describe to you guys how lovely and deep this concept is. So, a lot of this came together when I was reading Plutarch. Plutarch was a brave Greek philosopher, writer, who addressed Egyptian religion and Egyptian traditions, Egyptian culture, and he, courageously linked it to his native Greek culture. Plutarch had visited Egypt, and there's evidence, according to scholars, that he was reading from books that other Greek writers of his time would have read from, and so he would have received the same information. But also, his whole book called De Iside et Osiride, so about Isis and Osiris, is addressed to a priestess at the Oracle of Delphi. And interspersed throughout this book, he's talking about how, oh, you priestess, you must know about these mysteries. I know that you know about these mysteries, about how the Greek gods and the Egyptian gods are one and the same. They just have different appellations. They just have different names. So, one interesting point that Plutarch makes about gods, and this relates to what I brought up at the beginning of the video about the Nephilim and the wickedness, but also the goodness that seems to be confusing in that biblical verse, that of the great men and then the flood, cleansing wickedness. How could there be great men on the earth of great renown who did great deeds and were heroic, but who were also wicked? So Plutarch addresses this specifically, and he cites Hesiod, who was another Greek authority on the gods, and Hesiod wrote the Theogony. So Plutarch points out that there are basically two classes of beings. There's the demigods, and then there's the full gods. So Plutarch asserts that Isis and Osiris would have started out as demigods. And the word for this in ancient Greek was daemon, or demon. So we can see how this word demon became so negative and so scary in our modern conception. And how that biblical verse of the Nephilim, I've seen it translated as evil spirits. Even though the words are very clearly saying that these beings, the Nephilim, were good and were men of great renown, there's still modern biblical translations that translate it as, the sons of God and the daughters of men created evil spirits. So I'm trying to point out how this is a half-truth. How they were good Nephilim and they were bad Nephilim. And this demon class of beings is exactly what I'm talking about. So let's look at the story of Isis and Osiris. Isis and Osiris were born along with their brother and sister, Set and Nephthys. So Isis and Osiris were a pair, and Set and Nephthys were a pair. I already talked about this. But if you know anything about Egyptian myth, which I'm sure you do, Set was the evil, chaotic brother. He's the god of all chaos. And he was the one who tricked Osiris and who killed Osiris. And this eventually led him to being chopped up in, 14 different pieces or 12 different pieces and being spread throughout the lands. And then Isis, of course, goes on her journey to reassemble her love, Osiris, and she lusts after the goodliness, the godliness in in the world, and therefore she goes after and tries to find her love in the form of the falcon or the hawk that is the fastest animal supposedly on this earth, the Egyptian falcon. So within the passage that Plutarch mentions Hesiod and talks about demons, he shows how Hesiod uses the term as both good and bad. So in Hesiod, there's passages where it says, what demon has possessed you? But then there's also passages that says, the demon Dionysus or whatever. The point is that it's a class of beings that is just simply powerful. That simply means superhuman powers. And from that class of beings, and this is cited in other ancient Greek authors as well, from that class of beings are derived the gods. So basically, Isis and Osiris became gods because they fulfilled their path in life. And so in that same passage, Plutarch mentions how these demons, these demigods, are not immune to karma. They're not immune to the repercussions of their actions like gods are. They have to go through the rigmarole of life. They have to fulfill their earthly mission in order to find their natural position in the heavens. And so that is the explanation I have for you guys about that verse, Genesis 6, 1 through 4. So then, if we fittingly connect these words by Plutarch to the Egyptian tradition, you see that the word good, which is what is used to distinguish the good demons from the bad demons. So the good demons are called good, and godliness is associated with them. The word good in ancient Egyptian is Nefer, N-F-R. And you can see it in the name of the wife of Akhenaten, Nefertiti. Nefertiti, the one with the really long skull. So there you go. Here's another link. Okay, but how do we arrive at a modern rulership of Orion by Mercury? It's curious, huh? Think about that for a second. So, I just mentioned how, of the class of demons, there were good ones and bad ones. Well, Plutarch later on in De Isidae et Osiridae goes on to explain in further detail what is good and what is bad, because it's a philosophical text. And it answers those questions of what is good, what is bad. For those of us adults who really get so confused in life sometimes that we need a philosophy, a greater philosophy to inspire us to do good. So, Plutarch ultimately mentions goodness as being attributed to a few various factors. First of all, he attributes goodness to moisture, and badness to the drawing influence. So, funny enough, right now, the sun is beating down really hard on me, and the sun, for that reason of its heat and its drying power, is harsh, and it creates the desert with its scorching heat, and that is bad. But it's also good because Plutarch goes on to talk about how the good is contained within the bad, and the bad is contained within the good, like the yin and the yang, the Chinese symbol, the Taoist symbol of truth, the black contained within the white, and the white contained within the black. So going along with the same line of thinking, he naturally calls the moon good, because the moon is a source of moisture, and it controls the tides, and it is that soft light that is that basically transmutes the harsh power of the sun into a soft light that blesses the earth with its moisture. So also in that list is Mercury. Mercury is known as the water star in Chinese. Shui Xing is Mercury. So that's one point of what goodness is. The next point that Plutarch makes, the strong point, is that goodness is movement. Goodness is change. Goodness is the flow of good things. But badness, on the other hand, is stagnation, obstruction. So obstruction and destruction are two aspects of the bad. When things are dead, they're stopped. Life is about the flow of energy. So he naturally attributes goodness to fastness. And so in many ways, Mercury and Hermes are the fastest of the gods. That is the fastest god. And also, the moon is the fastest celestial body. It moves the fastest through the zodiac, and Mercury is the second fastest. So because Mercury and the moon are associated with both moisture and swiftness, they are associated with goodness. And then Mercury traditionally is associated with the scribes, which goes back to the god Nebu in the Mesopotamian tradition, and that color of the beautiful celestial sapphire blue that they painted all of their temples with. With all that information, there's such a wealth of knowledge. And also within that information, you have so many subtle things that you can derive out of that. And I would love if anybody has any knowledge of ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia or just insight to comment, leave a comment and let me know what you think about these topics. Because drawing connections is lovely, and I would love to facilitate the flow of discussion on my channel. That would be a goal of mine. So, in addition to all that, you have the symbolism of Anubis being associated with, of course, the dog. And then what is the dog star? The dog star is Sirius. So I've been also researching some ancient Persian thought, Zoroastrianism. And in ancient Persia, the name for the dog star was Tistria. And Tistria and Tyr are similar words, and they were often confused with each other. So the word Tyr is the word they use for the planet Mercury. And they often confused Mercury and the dog star in naming. And I find that very interesting because it links the dog of Anubis to the dog star, which is Sopdet in ancient Egypt. And this Sopdet comes to be associated with Isis, that loyal follower of Osiris, the dog star being the loyal follower of Orion, and Sirius, the dog star, being the brightest star in the sky, and being of a nice, lovely bluish tint. So, as much as I would love to move the world with more facts and more revelations, that's all I really have to say for right now, all I can think of. I hope some awesome connection doesn't come to me later, but I'm going to make this video, I'm going to finish it, I'm going to put it up there, so hopefully to facilitate more discussion and to show you guys what I've been researching and how lovely it all comes together when you see the connections in between cultures and in between ancient societies, and how these original concepts became a little bit confused in our history, our religious history. So that's it for now. I hope you guys have a lovely day or night whenever you're watching this, and I hope you guys can leave some comments just to let me know what you think, or if you have any expertise in these areas, please feel free to contribute, argue. I'd love to discuss these points further. They're lovely, fertile points of discussion. So thanks, guys.